Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And we have light. Welcome, welcome. So glad to be here with you all today. We will be having a great live stream this morning. Excuse me. And we'll give a few minutes to allow people to trickle in and join in as we create this beautiful sacred space together. We're going to be talking about why we get addicted to the people that hurt us. So a very compelling topic, a very interesting and valuable topic, especially if you've been affected by this. And we're going to dive into that a bit more as we continue. So if you're new here, or if you're not, and you feel called to say hello, please give an emoji in the chat of your current mood, or introduce yourself if you would like. Bring your voice into the room. It's a beautiful Sunday morning here in Mexico. I'm on the biggest lake in Mexico. And I've already been out this morning, and it's beautiful as always. And if you are new to me, I'm Natalie, spiritual life coach and Reiki master teacher. I've been a teacher on Insight Timer for 5 years now. You can follow me here. You can check out my meditations. I have many free and premium tracks and more to come. You can also join my group, Natalie's Healing Circle. And that's a group where we can stay connected here in Insight Timer outside of the live streams. So you can follow me here. You can follow me also in my YouTube channel where I am streaming this as well. Or Facebook and Instagram. You can follow me. And check out my website if you would like. I haven't spoken yet today, as you can probably tell. So, Insight Timer has changed things to where now I can see people. Before they took it away, then they brought it back. So welcome to Montwinkle, Betsy, Ryan, Tatiana, Nina, Eliana, Jay, Leticia, Assad, Marian, Dewey, S, Geraldine, Pauline, Edwards, and those of you, more of you are joining in. Mim, Kel, welcome, J.E. Excuse my voice. Good morning. Okay. So, how many of you can relate to feeling addicted to a person? Give an emoji in the chat or a word if that's you. Welcome, Lottie. I can definitely raise my hand on that one. And isn't it such a painful, painful dynamic to be in? Yeah, and it makes sense if that's happened in the past, Mon, that then it would, there would be hesitation on trying again. So today we're going to look at, where this comes from, why it happens, and then we can look at ways to work with this so that it doesn't, I don't want to say doesn't happen again, because I feel like, those sorts of dynamics can be very intrinsic to us, and also ways we can minimize it, or ways we can work with seeing that pattern in ourselves. So, we're going to talk about attachment, trauma bonding, addiction. Mostly this is going to show up in romantic relationships, but not always. So whether you're single, partnered, widowed, sworn off, love forever, given up hope, this can still apply whether you are, dating or in a romantic relationship where you might notice these things. Because as I said, we're going to look at the roots of where this comes from. Not to shame ourselves, not to make ourselves wrong or see ourselves as flawed, and not to blame and focus on the other person and how bad they are, and also not to condone anyone's behavior. So we're in this middle intersection where no blame, no shame for ourselves, for others, but also not saying what anybody has done that's abusive has been okay. So we'll meet in that magic middle where there is responsibility, where there's choice, where there's knowledge, where there's wisdom, where there's loving acceptance for ourselves, and just information. Because you may have heard me say this before, I was in a narcissistic, abusive, romantic relationship a number of years ago, and I didn't know what was happening at the time. I didn't know that's what it was. I mean, I knew it was fucked up, and I knew I felt insane, and I knew it was abusive. But, psychological abuse and things like that, if you don't have a frame to put it in, can feel even more overwhelming and confusing. So, giving voice to these things, me teaching about this, teaching where it comes from, can help with understanding and acceptance, in identification. So when we have that understanding, then we can be armed with that understanding. So how many of you can relate to feeling like I said, like you're addicted to a person? It might even be, I think about my mother, and she's a maternal narcissist and an alcoholic and a workaholic. And I can feel addicted to her approval, or trying to get her approval. So this can also, as I said, show up in other ways. So that could be one example that some of you may relate to. It could be, the terrible, horrible boss. Maybe that you get addicted to trying to please, and it's never good enough. So even though these things are very different types of relationships in one sense, they also share similarities underneath, which is the addiction dynamics that we're going to go into. Good morning, Charlotte. Yeah, you are welcome. And this is so near and dear to me in my heart because of my own experience and my own journey. And I feel passionate about sharing about it because I've been in live streams here with many of you, and people have had major awakenings and shifts, even in the live streams, hearing about this stuff because they hadn't heard it before, and it finally made everything make sense, which is the first step. So we want to look at how many of you have been in a safe relationship of any kind. I have also had that dynamic before. I married a man that, we had whatever, healthy, safe relationship. Do they exist, Jeff? Yes, they do. Well, there you go. There's Betsy's in one. So the universe is answering you immediately with somebody in the room. And you can feel, if you've been in an addictive relationship or felt addicted to a person, you can feel the difference. There's a sense of safety in the body. There's a sense of peace. There's predictability. Now, the thing is, if you've had a history of addictive relationships, feeling addicted to a person, feeling unsafe, being in abusive or trauma bond dynamics, the safe relationship can feel boring. How many of you can relate to that? So, and again, this all comes from childhood, which we're going to get to. But we want to look at, why does this feel so powerful? What is that draw? If you think about, if you can relate to being in a dynamic where you felt addicted, what did you do to preserve the connection? Why did it feel so powerful? How did it make you crazy? Because I imagine, when we use the word addiction, that's a very strong word. Addiction intrinsically to anything means losing power and control. So if we feel addicted to a person, we feel out of control and like we have no power in relationship to that person. In other areas of your life, you may feel like you're pretty, well balanced, you have a good head on your shoulders, you make good decisions, people don't take up space rent-free in your head. But with that one dynamic, it's like you're like a Jekyll and Hyde. Who all can relate to that? So, especially in romance, especially in these sorts of addictive dynamics, it will start out very, very strong. Love at first sight, twin flames, soulmates, declarations of love, future plans, making them, very, very, very quickly. And so that intensity creates a false intimacy. You cannot have true intimacy with somebody you don't know. But yet all of the chemicals in the body, the chemical cascades that are happening, the dopamine, the oxytocin, it's like you're literally high on a drug. How many of you can relate? And then it's like when you're not together, you're obsessed, you can't think about anything else. And then they pull away. It might be a tiny thing at first, but if you're attuned to this happening, your nervous system is going to freak the fuck out. And then there's going to be that uncertainty. And then you're going to question everything, and then you're going to not know where you stand. So these highs and lows create this bonding. The uncertainty creates the obsession. And then fantasy comes in. Hi, Ava. Yes, toxic bonding, definitely. And then fantasy comes in, because the fantasy of this picture that was painted in the beginning, of course you believe it. Of course. And I'm not saying that this this happens maliciously. I think sometimes it can, and a lot of times it doesn't. It's just people going with the flow. Now, which dynamic can you relate to being on? The one where you're being wooed, you're being like shown this fantasy, or are you the one that comes on strong with somebody else and makes, these future promises? I'd say for most of the community here, we're going to be on the side that is like receiving the intensity. Yeah, great point, Jeff. So we confuse all of this with real connection. And really, it's about the chemistry that's happening in the brain and body, in this bonding that occurs. Now, we also don't want to go to the other side of pathologizing everything, right? So I want to share this with you so you can learn to have your own discernment. So, love is not a feeling. And that might land controversial. And if we can just dissect that in a few different ways. But all like this experience of, quote, falling in love is an experience that there's a book called The Road Less Traveled. Has anyone heard of it? It's very old now. Very famous book. And I read this book 25 years ago. And really, I only remember one thing, well, maybe two things from it. That this experience of falling in love was, comes from evolution of the species to have us deeply bond with somebody for procreation. But the book said, love begins when that in-love feeling ends, and it always ends. That honeymoon feeling phase. The person can do no wrong. You are each other's everything and all of that. And so going back to the toxic, because that's, quote, normal, like, and that can be in a safe relationship and a healthy relationship. The thing is, when that honeymoon phase ends, when that rush ends, that's when the love begins. because love is a choice and an action. It's not about, we say falling in love. It means like that is like, oh, I'm overtaken by something I have no control over. And it feels that way. And it feels very delicious if it's reciprocal and equal. But in that way, it doesn't feel like a choice. I remember the last relationship I was in, it was more healthy and serious. I did not have that falling in love experience. I had an experience of slowly getting to know a person without being engulfed with all of the chemicals and the sex. And because if you add in sex fast, that's like putting gasoline on the fire. Am I right? Especially if you don't know them, and then if you don't know them well, and then that brings just another level of bonding, deep physical bonding. So with this relationship that I was in that I'm talking about, I got to know them slowly, and I did not fall in love with him. I had an experience of choosing to love him. And that was my first time having that. And it wasn't like I set out to do it that way. That's just how it occurred. But it was a very different experience because I got to know this person as a three-dimensional human being over time. If you meet somebody and you get swept up, and then if we add in the toxic dynamics, it's like you're interfacing with a construct of a person. They aren't even three-dimensional. Because if you rush in or you allow yourself to be taken in by it, and it's not, again, of course we do this. It's not like saying we're wrong for it. I'm just describing the dynamics of how you cannot have deep knowing of somebody in intimacy after, a few weeks, no matter how deep and twin flamey it feels. Right? So it's like people fall in love with this idea in this fantasy. Oh, hi, Christine. Pain instructs. I don't remember that. I would love to hear more. So it's like it's projections. We project all of this stuff. We project all our yearning, our longing, our fantasy, what we want. And of course we do. Bless our hearts. And you know why? Because our little wounded child, and on both sides, both of our little inner children are coming out onto the playground of life and just being like, oh my God, you're my new best friend. I love you. But we bring all of our wounding. And so coming back to, when we get into the addictive part, because some of what I'm talking about is quote normal, whatever that means, like romantic progression in relationships. But these strong feelings don't automatically mean healthy love. True intimacy can only come over time and experience of knowing somebody. And how many of you have had the experience of what's called love bombing? Somebody coming in full force. They come in, they dump their life story on you. I've had this happen to me. And it feels so intense and powerful and compelling. And I'm like, wow, I'm getting to know this person. But it is not true intimacy, because that can only be built over time. So I had this other dynamic with somebody who did that. And even though I knew about this stuff, I still fell for it. Bless my little heart. When I was in it, it was like I could sort of see it, but also not really. But the more experience we get, the more, you will recognize this happening. True intimacy feels safe, feels secure. And yeah, Emma, that's why it's so addictive, because it's like, wow, somebody's finally, choosing me, wanting me, sharing everything so deeply with me. Yep, and Jay, the toxic attachment happens because if we're talking about the addictive part of it, right? And I'm going to give it away. Maybe y'all already know this, but I'm talking about attachment styles. So the avoidant person comes in, they love bomb, and us little anxious attachment people, which most of us are in here, we just, get swept up in it because it feels so good. Of course. But if the person's anxiously attached, once we then move towards them, that will trigger them to pull away. And then that's when you, as the anxious attached person, whoosh, addiction, it's like crack cocaine. Thanks, Sharon Lynn. Thank you so much. So glad you're here. And yeah, Jeff, bringing up self-esteem. This all comes from childhood, as I said. So it's that wounded inner child who also had the same dynamics with, the main primary caregivers. So it's this trigger coming up. The little wounded child part of us is like, oh my God, I'm finally getting the love I never received in childhood. But yet it's the same dynamic, because if you had an inconsistent parent that pulls away and all that, it's going to feel, quote, normal, familiar, comfortable. Your nervous system is going to recognize, oh, I know this very well. I feel at home. How many of you have been like, oh, I feel at home with this person? But if you grew up in a traumatic childhood, whoo, red flag. You don't want to feel at home with them because your home was not safe. Jay, that's you. Wonderful. Thanks, Sharon Lynn. So, we've got to heal that blessed little child inside of us that just wants secure love. And we get to be the person, that, like, we get to be that person we're looking for. And it's like, we all know this. It's like, no, not this again. We get to heal ourselves. We get to love ourselves. It's like, yeah. Because if we come in, and not that to say it's a myth that you have to be fully healed. And, you know, working on yourself to the best of your ability. So, because if you are somewhat secure in your own self and you've done the deep work, you know, this person's going to come in, it's not going to be so compelling. It's not going to have the same addictive pull. Actually, it's going to be like, whoa, red flag. You don't even know me. The trap there is, okay, what can happen if you've been in these extreme sides that we're talking about with the addiction and the attachment, the love bombing, the narcissism, the trauma bonding, all of that stuff. The propensity can be that somebody then goes to the other extreme and completely shuts everybody out and completely isolates and never allows themselves to be open to any sort of connection ever again, out of a sense of protection, self-protection. But that is also toxic. So it's called sexual anorexia. Sexual anorexia is when you go from one extreme to the other and you don't do the deep healing work. The thing that it can disguise itself as that, because you're like, oh, I'm not dating, like I'm single, but it's a complete retreat from intimacy, and that's not healthy either. So, not to say like everybody has to want to be in a relationship, but the anorexia is like, has certain dynamics that are also dysfunctional in their own way. So you get to watch out for that as well. It's like, I'm going to wall myself off from any connection. It can even go into social anorexia. Because I want to feel safe. I want to feel in control. I've been hurt too many times. So, by the way, if you are joining in, I'm Natalie, spiritual life coach, Reiki master teacher. Please give me a follow here. I also have an Etsy store where I have digital instant download workbooks and journals that if this all resonates with you, you will find something that will help you in my store. I've got a number of products around toxic relationships, breakups, all of this. Right now I'm working on a 90-day breakup journal that's a deep dive, and you do, brief writing every day if you're getting over a breakup. I also have a trauma bond recovery, narcissistic abuse, all different sorts, and they're all very reasonably priced. So if you want to visit my Etsy store, and that would also support me as I'm just starting it out, it's called Heartbreak Recovery Co. And you can message me if you want the information. So, as I said, this all comes from childhood, just like everything does. So how many of you had inconsistent parenting or caregiving? How many of you had a parent who was hot and cold, a parent, and it might be a grandparent, it doesn't have to, but I'm just saying parent because it's easier, where they were hot and cold, where love was contingent on your performance, where maybe you would clean the house in the same way, do your chores, and one time you got praise for it and then the next time it wasn't good enough, where there was uncertainty, where there was withholding of love based on your behavior, where there was abuse of any kind. There's something else that happens called parentification, where you, the parent, to your parent. So many times this happens, and this is so debilitating and traumatic for children, where they become the emotional support for their parent. I've had all of this. Your mom checked out of your life, Jay. I'm sorry to hear that. Christine can relate, Betsy, Jay. So, of course we can talk for hours on all of that, and why I say that is that is where this imprint forms in our nervous systems, in our brains, in our bodies, to where that all feels familiar and comfortable. And even though it's unpredictable, it's familiar. So then, of course, we create those dynamics in our adult relationships. So there may have been inconsistency and predictability. You may have to have earned closeness. Maybe how many of you had to suppress your feelings or put on an act or put on a show, good boy, good girl? How many of you weren't allowed to have your own feelings? And that is a hallmark of an emotionally immature parent. So I'm going to do a separate live stream on this, because this one is deeply impactful, and this is like a newer concept that's come out in the last years. And the minute I heard it, I was like, oh my God, that's my parents. Again, not to, put all the focus on them, and it helps explain my experience. Ava, I'm sorry that you grew up with an alcoholic father. It is so tough, and that has, devastated so many people and families and generations, and the impact of that is lifelong. And the good news is there's healing that's available. That's amazing, Jay, that you were her caregiver and got to forgive your mom. How powerful. But yes, emotionally immature parents, that means their feelings superseded everyone else's. That means you as a child had to consider and caretake your parents' emotions, and that theirs were most important, and they were the only ones that were allowed to have emotions. How many of you can relate to that? It was like my mom was the only one that was allowed to be mad in the family. Nobody else was allowed to get angry or upset. So then you learn to stuff your feelings, you learn to put on a show, you learn you're not important, your feelings aren't valid. It's like a living gaslighting. So again, just touching into all that to give understanding and oh, it makes sense why I would choose the same type of people over and over again, because it feels familiar. So you'll chase emotionally unavailable people, you'll overgive. How many of you overgive and give so many chances even after they've proven through their actions that they don't deserve what you're giving and that you deserve more, but you keep going back anyway? How many of you know the word breadcrumbing and have focused on receiving those crumbs? I mean, your parents could have breadcrumbed you, given you tiny bits of affection. And then you learn to ignore your own reality. And even in like the romantic dynamics, you know, I remember when I told y'all earlier in the live, like I was in a narcissistic abuse romantic relationship dynamic. And it was so interesting. Of course, this was all hindsight. But I remember having this feeling in my gut. My intuition knew something was wrong. And this was many years ago too, and so I am much more tuned into my intuition now. But see, this is the thing. If you were like me and you grew up in these sorts of dysfunctional dynamics, you learn not to trust yourself. You learn not to trust your body. You learn not to trust your feelings or your intuition because you're gaslit and you're discounted and you're diminished. So, and I did that in this narcissistic dynamic. And then looking back, I was like, oh my God, I had this deep feeling of dread, in this like heavy dread feeling in my gut in the first few days I met this person. And of course, I remember when it happened, I was like, well, this is weird. I was thinking, why am I feeling like this? It's like, well, later on I found out, even though nothing had happened, you know, in the 3D yet in the connection. Yeah, Betsy, making the red flags into bows. I haven't heard that. Or painting them green. So you may have learned, you know, in childhood that love required self-abandonment. You know, bless our little hearts. So we want to look at like the addictive dynamic itself. And I've talked about this before, but it's called intermittent reinforcement. So how many of you don't know that term? And also I've used other terms here: breadcrumbing, love bombing, narcissism, trauma bonding, attachment styles, anxious attachment, avoidant attachment. You know, this is a new language system if you're not familiar with it. So if you don't know what any of those means, please tell me, and we will review intermittent reinforcement, because that is underneath it all. So we've talked about like what it looks like: the hot and cold, the breadcrumbing, the uncertainty. The clearest example of it in its purest form, you know, it's like a scientific term. And, you know, scientists have done studies with rats where they would have like a lever they would push and they would get a pellet of food. So, you know, you push the lever, you get food. So every time you push, you get food. Great. That feels safe. That feels familiar. That feels comfortable. That feels predictable. So the rat learns that. Well, then they experimented with, let's not give them food when they push the lever. Intermittently. So I think it was, I could be wrong, but like the rats where it was just consistent, they learned to trust it. And then it's like when they were hungry, go press the lever, get food. But then the ones that they received it might be every third time, every fifth time, every 10th time, just totally random. Those rats were obsessed and addicted. Press the lever, press the lever, press the lever. It's a thing that happens in the brain. Totally, Mon. So if you the biggest example, the easiest one, is a slot machine. If we think about our own lives, or like a human example, slot machine is intermittent reinforcement. You don't like never win, and if the rats never received a pellet of food, well, they would get bored and they wouldn't go back, but you get it just enough to keep you hooked, and that's definitely slot machines. And gambling addiction is one of the most powerful because of this mechanism. So if we become addicted to a person, I mean, there's so many different ways we look at this. The attachment dynamics, the childhood stuff. But if we just kind of look at this purely, it's like, okay, somebody love bombs you, and you get all of this, juiciness and love and coziness and passion and all of the reward, and then they start pulling away, and then they start behaving unpredictably. When before, if they would text you back in 5 minutes, then it becomes 5 hours. And then that's when the brain, that intermittent reinforcement's like, what's happening? Oh my God, oh my God. And then that anxious attachment part. Because if you're anxiously attached, you get soothing and nervous system safety from the connection with the person. The avoidantly attached person gets their sense of soothing and safety from pulling away. Because in childhood, an avoidantly attached person was engulfed by their caregivers. They had no boundaries. They were totally engulfed. The intimacy was too much. And that could be like emotional incest. It could be surrogate spouse dynamics, where a parent treats a child like their spouse emotionally. And the child, it doesn't know boundaries. So in adults, that dynamic turns into the avoidant attachment, where their nervous system attaches connection with danger. So they pull away. Now, you can have a relationship with an avoidantly attached person. It just takes both people. Like if you're anxious attached, you've got to work on your stuff. They've also got to be willing to work on their stuff. So it's like all these different layers, right? Like if there's abuse, emotional abuse, trauma bonding, narcissism, of course, physical, sexual abuse, whatever, like that's one thing. But also there can be people that it's just like these dysfunctional patterns of anxious and avoidant attachment styles that can be worked with if both parties are willing. So for most of us, as I said, being in the anxious side of things, we learn to abandon ourselves because we were gaslit as children. We may be being gaslit in the connection. So then we just learn to gaslight ourselves. We will explain away behavior. We will make excuses for the other person. We will paint red flags green. We will ignore our intuition. We will become addicted to the fantasy of their potential. How many of you have done that? You see the potential in them, and you're with them for their potential, but not who they are right now. And that's a painful one. Or this is where fantasy addiction can come in. How many of you have been in a fantasy addiction? I mean, I can raise my hand to all these things. And this is also where something called limerence comes in, where you might be in like a situationship, which is not an official committed relationship. It's like this ambiguous, no expectation, no responsibility connection, which avoidantly attached people like, because there's no commitment. So you may be emotionally loyal to a person that's not even available and is giving you breadcrumbs, and you stay because you're addicted to the fantasy, you're addicted to the potential. You might be addicted to the version of them who showed up in the first few days or weeks or months, but that person is long gone, and that reality, or it has never manifested of them, all the promises they made. And so what happens is, like, if the person isn't even really super connected to you anymore, your mind will just be in constant obsession about like filling in the blanks. And you basically have a relationship with a fantasy in your mind and not with the actual person. And this is all very painful. Jackie, Betsy. So, as I said, I have Etsy workbooks on my Etsy store to deep dive into healing all of this. And you get to do it on your own, working through the workbooks. They're done in phases of healing. So check out my Etsy store, Heartbreak Recovery Co., or send me a message. I can send you the link. Everything is most everything's under $10, so it's very reasonably priced. I'm also willing to have a conversation with anybody, like a coaching conversation where we would dive into these dynamics for you specifically, so that you can start breaking free if you're stuck, or if you don't want to recreate it in the future. Yeah, and Jackie, that's called limerence. It's all very painful. And many of you know I'm an alcoholic and drug addict in recovery for a long time. And it wasn't until, I don't know, in the past 7 years, maybe, that I realized my first addiction was fantasy. When I was 5 years old, I had crushes on boys in school, and I escaped into my own little world, and I escaped into reading books. Those were like my two addictions before I found alcohol and drugs. You know, some children find food or whatever, but that happens because there wasn't safety in the home and there was abuse. So this limerence happens because our parents are not safe. So we've got to first be aware of all of this. That's the first step. And especially, like, if any of you are in a relationship in your mind with somebody that doesn't exist, it's time to break that. Or if you are in, you might be actively in this dynamic. Or you might be scared, you're single and you're scared. Or you might be like, never again, and you might be on that sexual anorexia side, where you've walled yourself off, and that is not recovery either. Betsy, your relationships with your daughter. Yeah, I mean, this can definitely be in all sorts of dynamics. It's just the language and the dynamics are going to be a little different. Hey, Britt. Good morning. So, if you're anxiously attached, if you're a victim of the abuse, or if it's just like unhealthy, like with an avoidant and an anxiously attached person, and most of you are going to be anxious, and that's me. The goal is like whatever you're projecting onto that person, whatever you're waiting for them to be, and again, of course, this can be going back to your parents too. You get to step in when that little wounded part of you wants to go to that person or to that fantasy in your mind or to that dynamic. You get to step in as your full, empowered, sovereign, adult self that you are right now, and you get to parent that wounded part. Thank you, Jay, for the donation. Nancy, I've heard of that book. Is it Love or is it Addiction? There was another one. My therapist gave me this book like 25 years ago. Love is Never Enough. There's many. What's the Pia Melody one? I had that one as well. It's like the textbook on love addiction. It might even be called that. There can also be dynamics where people are mixed. And I have that as well. Like you can be both avoidant and anxious attached, like depending on the connection or depending on the dynamics. You can be fearful avoidant, there's all different things. But the main thing is we want to get to is secure attachment. And we're the only ones that can heal that within ourselves. Codependent no more, Christine, yes, but there's another one that is like about love addiction. Yeah. Anyway, Pia Melody, she is the expert. So you get to learn self-trust. Having all this as awareness is a first step. As I said, my workbooks on Etsy are a great resource. Heartbreak Recovery Co. or ask me for the link. Everything's very reasonably priced and on sale. Mostly, I believe. And as I said, I can offer anybody who would like to have a conversation about this to help you get clear. If you've never had a conversation with me, it would be a gift as you're part of my community. Yeah, and there's such potential for healing here. And also there's 12-step groups for this. Adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families. I would highly recommend for anybody that can relate to anything here. That's about becoming your own loving parent that you didn't receive, which helps heal all of this. And Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. And there's like Sex Addicts Anonymous, there's Sexaholics, there's different flavors. The biggest one is Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. That's kind of like an umbrella for all these different dynamics. Thank you, Stephanie, for that. So it's been wonderful to be with you. If this was helpful, please give a donation. Thank you, Sharon Lynn. You can follow me here on this link. You can give a donation here. And please follow me on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. Check my website. This all helps me to continue to do this with you all. You're welcome, Jay. Thank you for joining. My next live stream is, oh, great, perfect, inner child. So if this resonated, you want to see the next one. And all my replays are on my YouTube channel. So if you missed this, some of it, and you want to see the whole thing, or you want to review it, or any of them from the past years, they're all in my channel. You can send me a message if you want the link. The next one is the inner child that thinks love must be earned. So we're going to dive more into that and more into the inner child dynamics. You're welcome, J.E. Angie. So I mentioned Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, SLAA. Is that the one? And also Adult Children of Alcoholics, ACA. But it's not just for alcoholic dynamics anymore. It's also for dysfunctional families. So even like for me, this is a good example. Like my parents are alcoholics and addicts, but in my childhood they were more like, it was like my mom was a workaholic more, but there was a lot of dysfunction. So it used to just be for alcoholic childhood dynamics, but now it's for all dysfunctional families, which most of us have. Bless all of our hearts. So again, please reach out if you feel called. Send me a message. It's been wonderful to be with you and bring this important topics to you and to Insight Timer. So I will see you all on May 22nd at 3 p.m. Eastern, the inner child that thinks love must be earned. So join that or catch the replay of that if this resonated, because that's where it all comes from. You're so welcome, Angie. Thank you so much for joining. Thanks, everybody. I will see you soon. Much love and namaste.